Speak now to our Trade Minister Tim Groser, who's with me in studio. Good morning, Minister. I'm sure you loved hearing what Sir Graham had to say there.
Yes, the cheque's in the mail, Sir Graham.
Yeah, indeed. All right, so is the TPP going to be signed and sealed by the end of the year?
Well, nobody believes it can be signed and sealed by the end of the year. The issue is whether we can politically do the deal, and then there would be at a minimum 3-4 month period of legal scrubbing before it would be in a position to be signed. So basically what we're talking about is, can we politically get the tough decisions required to get us over the line by the end of the year?
That's what John Key said in Bali. He said there needs to be quite a bit of heavy lifting. What's he referring to there?
Well, I think there's a number of issues. I mean, first of all, this is fundamentally, as all trade agreements are, a text-based negotiation. And the text that I've got in my safe in Parliament is some 569 pages long. And officials have done outstanding progress from the 12 countries concerned in getting that into shape. So that has to be completed. And then the governments with the real political problems, because let me assure you, when I look at it, we in Singapore are sitting down there with almost zero problems with this negotiation by any relative standards. These other countries, like Japan, have got to take some meaning-of-life decisions they haven't taken for 70 years.
Where are the stumbling blocks, though, going to come? Certainly, Sir Graham Harrison suggested, agriculture, is that going to be the issue here?
Oh, absolutely. In my view, it always is, unfortunately for us, because we're always caught right in the vortex of the storm because of the structure of our agri-businesses. So that will be by far the most difficult issue. And I went to Japan before I met the Prime Minister in Bali for this meeting, and then went on with a couple of our farming leaders, not Sir Graham, to Hokkaido, the centre of Japan agriculture, just for us to get a sense of where they are. And I think Sir Graham's absolutely nailed it. They're going nowhere, and actually they need now agriculture reform.
Sure. So what are we going to see? Are we going to see the tariffs just collapsed?
No, and we've been very clear about this. I mean, we know from our own past, when we cleaned New Zealand protectionism out, that we needed years and years of adjustment. We needed, if you look at some of the uncompetitive New Zealand agriculture industries at that time, like the wine industry, they needed years of adjustment to competition with Australia. They needed subsidies to help them. They needed to completely change their way of thinking. We're not expecting any fast change here because it's unrealistic.
So it's going to be a slow process.
Slow process.
OK. You may have heard David Cunliffe's concerns earlier. He's talking about intellectual property. Sir Graham Harrison flagged that up as well. John Key talked about procurement issues as well. And you've also got, situations, say, with Pharmac. Do these situations just have to take a hit, really, because we're pushing through what you deem to be a good trade deal? Well,
I think this conversations taking place on two levels. One is a substantive and, in my view, completely understandable and legitimate discussion in New Zealand about Pharmac, intellectual property rights, and so on and so forth. The other is really an internal argument going on inside the New Zealand Labour Party right now. Now, on that, I don't actually want to go there. They've got to sort this out for themselves. This is a proxy fight for a bigger issue.
It's not just a Labour argument, though, about intellectual property.
So let me come back to the substance of it. There are legitimate concerns which we, the government, also share on all of those issues, and our negotiating positions, which have been worked out very carefully with full participation of stakeholders, which have got very clear red lines for our negotiators. We will ensure
Pharmac,
we get
Fonterra, the SOEs, all
I
of
am
these.
very confident we will get a deal for New Zealand at the end of this complicated process that will be absolutely fine.
Can you give that reassurance to Labour? Because you're going to need parliamentary approval to get this through.
Many times, number one, New Zealanders will not be paying more for their drugs as a result of TPP.
That's categoric.
Said absolutely categoric. The issue is not allowing the underlying Pharmac model to be weakened in such a way that we end up as taxpayers paying too much for it, not as consumers of medicines. Number two, I've said categorically, Pharmac is not on the table. We're happy to listen to alternative suggestions around the details. I mean, I could repeat that across all the sensitive issues. We will end up with a deal that will be absolutely doable from a New Zealander's point of view.
Intellectual property is another one. This could inhibit New Zealand companies, for example, from securing a patent. This is what David Cunliffe highlighted before. How do you get around that? Or is that just something that we have to accept? Because
the concern is wildly exaggerated. First of all, New Zealand is a country which has intellectual property interests and need to be protected. We were told by our experts that New Zealand film loses $100 million a year through counterfeit film. So we have interests also in terms of having a robust framework. But in terms of, this argument, chilling innovation, look, the United States is the most innovative country in the world. This argument that somehow US intellectual property law chills innovation is simply not consistent with the facts.
Well, while we're on this issue as well, I mean, we know what we're going to get economically, but what do we lose here? For example, let's use the situation with Kim.com. Does the TPP allow America to just roll in and tap him on the shoulder?
Not at all. Not at all. When this deal is done, I am certain that I and the Prime Minister will be able to come in front of New Zealanders and say this is virtually all upside. And the reason for that, I've said many times to New Zealanders in the past, is because we did the hard yards 20 years ago. This New Zealand is sitting up there poised to gain an absolute prize from this negotiation.
And then also you'll have people who'll tell you this will allow companies who are offshore to come in and sue our government.
Yes, but this is because this is what I mean about, Rachel, this is the argument's going on at two levels. One on substance, which is entirely legitimate. The other is a political game going on.
So why is there all this suspicion then? Are you not getting your message across?
Well, I think we're getting our message across to the people that matter, but on the far left of New Zealand politics, we will never, ever get our message. Well, that's something for New Zealanders to decide when we rock up to the next election.
Right, OK. Some will say, theoretically speaking, this makes New Zealand, in terms of the other 11 or 12 nations involved in the TPP, that essentially makes New Zealand borderless to TP members.
Well, if we look at the trade regime, we essentially are at that point now, and we have prospered as a result of opening up our economy to the world and getting reciprocal benefits in exchange. In terms of these arguments around Pharmac, no, we're not going to remove all that structure to protect New Zealand public policy and future government's right to regulate in the environment and in public health. And when the full details of this are apparent, New Zealanders can make their own judgment, our Parliament can make their own judgment.
Japan and the States stand to benefit a lot. And again, critics will suggest that New Zealand has come in a little bit as the go-between here. They stand to benefit the most from this, don't they? The Japanese and the Americans.
Well, in absolute terms, inevitably, because that's the #1 and #3 economy in the world. In relative terms, New Zealand will gain more than any country in TPP. Absolutely clear, because of the structure of these massive protective barriers that will come down, will benefit New Zealand more than any country in this negotiation. Now, in terms of Japan and the United States, let me just say this. Japan's entry into this negotiation has been outstanding. It has worked enormously, as Graham was saying, in terms of sparking the interests of the Americans in this negotiation and shifting the centre of American political possibilities in exactly the direction New Zealand wants. Secondly, in the meeting chaired by our Prime Minister, the Prime Minister of Japan, I'm going to go into details, obviously, was extremely helpful as we're trying to steer through some quite tricky issues.
Why can't you go into detail?
Because nobody would involve New Zealand if we break fundamental confidences on this.
Secrecy sparks fear and concern and unrest, and that's what you see in New Zealand at the moment.
Well, it's not a question of... It's complete confidentiality on the texts. By agreement, anyone that broke that rule would be out of the negotiations. But it's not secrecy about the objectives. We're sitting here in front of the public of New Zealand, whatever your viewing ratio is, and we're trying to explain the underlying principles. So I don't accept that they've been secret, but the texts have to be confidential in order to get a result.
Okay. And then when you get that result, you've got to come back here and sell it domestically and get parliamentary approval. What chance of that do you think?
Well, we have to look, I don't think it's helpful for me to try and put people in corners. I think that when people can look at the full deal, they will reach the conclusion that this is an outstanding deal for New Zealand, and then we'll see where they take their political positions, including the New Zealand Labour Party.
Are we going to get it through before the next election?
Well, it depends on the negotiations. Look, on this issue, we've just 4 million New Zealanders have learned the hard way with the America's Cup that nothing is done until it's done. So all I'm saying is we're making progress, we're moving forward, and let's hope we can get something done as soon as possible.
All right, Trade Minister Tim Groser, appreciate your time this morning. Thank you.